to order. Could I get roll call, please?
Chairperson Kimbrough.
Here.
Vice Chair Stedfield.
Here.
Member Bagwell. Here. Member Bonkowski.
Here.
Member Erb. Member Hastings.
Here.
Member McQuarrie.
Here.
Ex officio member Rosenberg.
Here.
A quorum is present.
So am I still supposed to read that comment about comments? Have you been doing that at all the meetings? Have you been? So the notice to the public part up there at the, I don't want to be out of line with that. Down at the bottom. All right, thank you. All right, well then, I'm sorry, I'm going back to, before we move on the agenda, to make an announcement that there's public comment limitations, although CAMPO often provides an opportunity for additional public comment during each specific item designated for possible action on the agenda. Public comment will be temporarily limited to the beginning of the agenda before any action is taken, and again at the end before adjournment. This policy will remain effective during the period of the time the state of Nevada is under the state of emergency as declared by the governor due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is intended to achieve the efficient conduct of meetings while facilitating public participation via video conference and telephone means. That good? Okay, great, thank you. So I'll go back to our agenda, and this agenda management notice. Is there any items we might change or take out of order?
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any disclosures for tonight's meeting? Hearing and seeing none, I'll move on from that. And this is a section where public comment, the public is invited at this time to comment, discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of this public body. Is there anybody on the phone?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes for possible action, discussion, and possible approval of the August 12th draft minutes.
I move to approve the minutes of August 12th, 2020 with a correction on item 6A, changing the word form to from.
Oh, good catch. Can I get a second? Second, Brad. Any other discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mark, I abstain. I wasn't at the last meeting.
All right, Chaz, thank you. One abstention. All right, so next on the agenda is public meeting items. First, 6A for possible action. Discussion of possible action and authorization for the CAMPO chair to execute amendment number 1 to cooperative agreement NM 696-16-804 with the Nevada Department of Transportation, extending the term of the agreement for 2 years and correcting CAMPO's address. Dirk.
Thank you, Chair. This is Dirk Loring for the record. So this item involves an existing agreement between the Nevada Department of Transportation and CAMPO. The agreement sets aside surface transportation grant funds, also known as STBG funds, from NDOT for CAMPO member agencies. The existing agreement was executed in December of 2016 and is set to expire September 30th of 2020. This is due to the end of the current federal transportation bill, also known as the FAST Act. The proposed amendment will extend the termination date to September 30th, 2022. No additional funds are being added. This will allow CAMPO's member agencies to obligate and seek reimbursement for existing projects. To date, all of the STBG funds have been allocated, and the remaining projects include the following: This County's Plymouth Drive Reconstruction Project and Carson City's Northridge Drive Reconstruction Project, as well as the Colorado Street Corridor Project. This concludes my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Mark, I did have a question.
Okay.
I noticed in the agreement the original agreement from 2016 that the contact people are Rudy Malfagon and Ray for NDOT and Ray Fierro for CAMPO. Do they need to be changed or amended, or is okay?
This is Lucia Maloney. The signature should be okay, and I'll let Todd disagree with me. It's the equivalent replacement staff in the signature lines of the amendment.
I would guess they're okay, because that's
If
when they.
Todd's happy, I'm happy.
All right, well, as long as Chaz is happy, we're okay there. Yeah, I assume that they were original signees, so that's good until forever, essentially, until there's an amendment like this with the wrong address. You guys moved? I didn't think you moved. Was a typo, I guess, originally or something, huh?
I believe that the address in the original agreement was the address of the Public Works corporate yard, so we're just redirecting to the main building.
Oh. All right, well, there was no questions. Is there any other comments? If not, look for a motion.
I moved to authorize the CAMPO chair to execute amendment number 1 to cooperative agreement NM 696-16-804 with the Nevada Department of Transportation, extending the term of the agreement for 2 years and correcting CAMPO's address.
Have a second? Second, Lori. Any other discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, unanimous. Move on to the next item on the agenda, 6B, for discussion only, informational presentation regarding fiscal year 2020 CAMPO activities. Lucia, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I do every year, I've provided an annual summary of CAMPO's activities. CAMPO staff are required to provide a quarterly report to NDOT. At the end of the fiscal year, we provide an annual report that was provided as Exhibit A. For additional detail, just to hit on some highlights for fiscal year 20, which is July 1, 2019 through June 30, 2020. Staff did have several activities and accomplishments last year, including regular administration of the Unified Planning Work Program and the Transportation Improvement Program, adoption of a new 2-year Unified Planning Work Program, administration of the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, development and approval of an amended Jump Around Carson Title VI program and DBE program and 3-year DBE goal, development and approval of the JAC Transit Development and Coordinated Human Services Plan, establishment of federally required performance measures and performance targets, establishment of an updated travel demand model in preparation for the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, as well as other accomplishments noted in that report. All scheduled milestones were accomplished successfully, including those where we had fallen behind from fiscal year 19 due to some staffing changes and resource constraints. Additionally, all budgets for all of the major work elements were maintained. Recognizing the challenges with managing so many individual task budgets in the 2-year fiscal year 19 and 20 UPWP, staff did recommend and received approval to consolidate task budgets into 4 major work elements in the currently adopted fiscal year 21 and 22 UPWP. This modified budget approach is anticipated to mitigate risk of task overruns associated with so many individual budgets with so small dollar amounts. Additionally, CAMPO staff have initiated discussions with NDOT and Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, regarding our need for additional fiscal analysts to support more real-time monitoring and administration of the CAMPO Work Program grant, as well as to better support the partner agencies in administration of their grants, their Surface Transportation Block Grant agreements. Staff have identified a need, just recently, Lyon County had that STBG grant that they weren't able to use. It's possible that had CAMPO had available resources to support that, we could better support our partners. So should funding become available, that's something that this body will certainly discuss before anything happens. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any additional questions or provide additional documentation.
Any questions? Chaz, you have questions?
This is Sandra. I have some comments.
Go ahead.
First of all, well done, Lucia. CAMPO really does a lot of work with a very small staff, and so you mentioned that, the comment about trying to get some funding for a fiscal analyst. Also in both the prior item and the next one, it all relates to CAMPO having a lot of demands with very few staff. So I would, I look forward to continuing those conversations with you, Lucia, but I would also ask this board to consider all the things that they do as the MPO and help us find additional revenues to support what they're doing. I mean, to be on such a tight timeline where if any one of these small pots of money has any delay or goes away, you guys are at risk of losing staff, and we don't want to see that happen. So we're happy to work with you, and we want to continue to work with you, but we also want to open it up and look for other solutions as well. So, but mostly well done. You've accomplished quite a bit this year, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I do have a question for you, Lucia. Some of the task budgets for FY 2020 have quite a bit of funding left in them. Will the majority of that be used up? Or do we just lose that money? Does it roll over?
That's a great question. So at the time that we're preparing the next UPWP and the monetary agreement that came in front of you in May, we do an estimate with CAMPO staff and NDOT staff to look at the rate of spend. We take into account things like contracts that are open and those types of things. So we did do an estimate of carry forward into fiscal year 21, and that sort of gets reconciled at the end in the next year's kind of carry forward. And so it all sort of rolls forward. Our carry forward dollar amounts are so low that unless Sandra corrects me, I don't believe we're at risk of losing anything.
And is there any?
No, that shouldn't be a risk.
Is there any outstanding revenue that has been billed for but not received?
At this time, no. We've processed all the invoices. We have an open on-call travel demand model contract and a pavement management contract, and both of those have been closed out for the fiscal year.
Any other questions? I have a couple. One of them is when you have an overage of just a percent, is there any protocols? It's truly about bottom lines, but is there any protocols for each of those? I guess the 4.1, the 2.1, where you can't go over like 5%? Let me know that.
That's also a great question. Again, Sandra, correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as the work element budgets are met and that no individual budgets are exceeded by more than 10%. It's generally okay without prior approval. And so we, although we try not to exceed it all, that's kind of what we shoot for.
Okay, thank you. The second one, I was actually going to make a comment that Sandra actually talked about, but she was looking for money from us. But as a board, it seems like we could vote a motion to support a new position that they're talking about in here. It seems to mean to come from us versus staff going to them and saying they want somebody. I mean, does that create strength to that? But maybe it doesn't sound that way after what Sandra just said, that she's looking for money from other places. But so that was my question, if this board has enough influence to help try to find that position. We're looking at you, Sandra, and you don't know that.
Well, let me add my perspective to this. I certainly, as a non-voting member of the board, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. But I think support for that position is certainly helpful for this board to understand that in order to meet all of the federal requirements that an MPO has to meet, having a fiscal expert is really going to be essential. So we're looking at various options, and I think my sort of ploy or my request for additional resources I didn't really expect you guys to come up with money, but showing that support, showing that this board sees that Campo needs more resources, probably wouldn't hurt. I don't know how helpful that is, but certainly having the board say, we understand all the pressures and all of the responsibilities of Campo as an MPO, and we would support this additional position, will be helpful in our discussions between NDOT and Federal Highway Administration and sort of searching through the couch cushions and all of that.
Great, that's the answer I was hoping for, actually. So, and there might be some metrics to help with that if we go to design that letter to support. Because I'm always amazed at all these reports you guys do, and I don't know how you can keep track of, you must have a great filing system to pay attention to all these 55 different requirements that you have to put out for those monies. So maybe we can put it on the agenda in a future meeting, because obviously it's not on tonight's meeting, but we could, for discussion. If there's no other comments to that, maybe we could do that in the future. And that might help. And then, and I'm going to close with to say that if I was doing evaluation right now and I saw this report for you and Dirk and your staff, I would give everybody an A+. So that's a lot of work. And I know it is, because I can't even keep track for these agendas, all the things that come up throughout the year. It's just phenomenal, and you guys are on top of them every time. So they need to get a lot of accolades for that.
We appreciate that. We have a really good team.
And Darren's not here for me to tell you to put stars on your charts or something, to be, that you're appreciated very much by this board to be able to move us through this. So thank you for that. Okay, is there any other comments on this? Is informational only? Seeing none, then I'll move next on the agenda is 6C for possible action, discussion of possible action to authorize use of CAMPO funds for a second transportation planner analyst for up to 4 months in an amount not to exceed $28,537.60.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep this presentation brief, but I expect you may have questions, so happy to discuss it further. The Campo Work Program, roughly is about $340,000 a year. This year, it's around 440, and that's due to previous year carry forward. Additionally, for this fiscal year, staff work with NDOT, and NDOT was able to provide $40,000 to support development of our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. So that's Campo's financial position. We fund about 2.5 positions, including a senior planner, a transportation planner analyst, and then a portion of the transportation manager. Separately, within Public Works Transportation Division, we oversee the Western Nevada Safe Routes to School program. This is a 4-county program, Carson, Douglas, Lyon, and Story counties, and that is funded with Transportation Alternatives Program, a TAP grant, dating back to 2016. The 2016 call for grant programs, and it was approved through the Board of Supervisors as a health department grant at the time. That program has since transitioned in 2017 to Public Works. We've evolved the program a little bit. It's much more focused on active transportation, transportation planning, and is really, hand in glove with the CAMPO Work Program for active transportation. We've recently used that program to develop a Safe Routes to School master plan for Carson City, and are looking at scoping a similar master plan effort in the other counties for Western Nevada Safe Routes to School as well. All those things benefit the CAMPO partner agencies. That said, staff submitted a TAP application for the next round of grant funding for this program. It came through the Regional Transportation Commission back in the spring. Due to the federal transportation legislation expiring on September 30 of this year, NDOT staff have been unable to do any awards for that call unless or until we get that federal transportation bill that lets us know how much money specifically in that program. Since I drafted the staff report, the situation is very dynamic, and we've been on the phone with NDOT staff. Sandra's been helping us out to try to figure out what we can do. As of this morning, NDOT staff feel very confident that we can take some sort of no-cost extension for some remaining money that we were unable to spend due to the COVID-19 situation in our current grant, and take that to the Board of Supervisors in the next month or so. In the meantime, staff are requesting that CAMPO provide bridge funding for this transportation planner analyst position. While funded with CAMPO, the staff member would participate in all the regular CAMPO activities. We have a great need to support development of the RTP, continue with our active transportation planning, and all of those good multimodal transportation activities that we do. So that's the request. It's anticipated that we would not need all that funding due to my conversations with NDOT about timing, but we have suggested 4 months to be safe. As in the past, during the last presidential election transition, we were in sort of a similar situation, and the new bill, as I understand, was passed in January. So that was the reason for the 4 months. We do think we can support that with the current budget due to the additional $40,000 that NDOT provided. If for some reason it got tight, the CAMPO Work Program does have planned a couple of contracted activities. Specifically, there's a Carson City pavement survey, and if needed, we would bump that out from this fiscal year to the following fiscal year, maybe from spring to fall, and still meet our program needs. So that's kind of the fiscal situation. I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions? Go ahead, Lori.
Just so that I can clarify, are what you indicating, that didn't come out well, that the Safe Routes to School program could have a no-cost extension? So we could bump out the September end date because you have sufficient funding there. And when will we find out whether we can just extend the grant date?
From my conversations with NDOT this morning, it would likely at earliest go to the Board of Supervisors in October. So there may be a couple weeks. It's the most optimistic scenario where CAMPO would cover this position. I will add that this position already periodically bills to CAMPO when they're working on CAMPO activities. That's just how the agreement works. But it would be full-time during any gap period.
The question that if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
The question is, so are you asking us to give this an up to 4 months because we don't have enough money don't we have enough in the Safe Routes to School? And should we just craft this motion more appropriately to say until the Safe Routes to School funding is provided? Is that what we're after?
I think both are options on the table. We did craft the staff report to say up to 4 months. Should the current agreement expire on September 30, and maybe we can't get it to the board until November 1st, there would be a 1 month period where we would ask CAMPO to cover that salary.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to chime in again here. I think it's helpful to have some backup from CAMPO, both if we can't get the agreement processed, but also because there are a lot of needs, and that allows this person to bill to some of the CAMPO activities as well. I do have some concern about it not going to the Board of Supervisors until October if it expires in September, but Lucia, maybe you and I can follow up on that afterwards. We are working through the new applications. I think my team may have given you slightly incorrect information that the expiration of the current bill is certainly a concern, and that would limit our ability to pay out any federal funds if we don't have authorization for them yet. But I did direct them that we could start working on the agreement. So either way, whether we can extend the current one or develop a new one, but we're working through a number of assurances in terms of policies and procedures and regulations and all of that is somewhat subject to change in a new bill as well. So it's the timing is terrible. Anything that ends in September is bad timing from a fiscal perspective. So again, as a non-voting member, I would recommend you move forward with the motion put forward to you today, because that gives you maximum flexibility. And certainly the full amount or the full time won't be used if it's not needed.
Thank you, Sandra, our non-voting member. That wouldn't work out very well. Go ahead, Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Supervisor Bagwell, I think maybe the other side of the coin to maybe a second part of your question had to do with the motion and approval, until the agreement. When staff discussed internally and we discussed with Dan Stuckey, we talked about giving assurance to this body that this isn't an additional position that's, staff are gonna add to Campo indefinitely. So that was why we felt important for transparency to give you some sort of assurance on an end date. So that was why we added that.
The end date's not in the proposed motion, though. Oh, does that clarify it? Just as presented? Okay.
And I'm assuming the 29,964 is 4 months worth.
That's correct. At the single salary at the current rate with over the next 4 years with the benefits.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mark, I would just like to say I'm a strong supporter of safe routes to school, as you know, and I support extending this position because, until the gap is filled from federal funding, because otherwise we're, going to be without one. So I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you. All right, so if there's no more questions, I'm going to call for a motion then. Anybody?
I move to authorize the use
Thank you.
of Campo funds for a second transportation planner/analyst as presented.
I have a motion, a second?
Second.
Second.
I'll second.
2 seconds. The virtual world doesn't allow us to do that very easily some ways. All right, thank you. So I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Was that a vote? I didn't think that was an abstention, it was just a noise, wasn't it? Okay, all right, so it's unanimous then. All right, next on the agenda. Board comments for information only. Status reports and comments. Start with Brad and move to the virtual world, I guess. No comment. No comment. No comment. We're in the virtual world. Chaz, any comment?
No.
Bob, any comments?
No, thank you, sir.
Sandra, do you have any last parting words?
No, I think I've said enough this afternoon.
It's all good though, Sandra. It's all good. Thank you. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled 4:30 Wednesday, the 14th here in the Sierra Room. Now this is a chance for the public comment. Is anybody on the phone?
There is no public comment,
All right,
Mr.
good.
Chair.
We can ask for somebody. Oh, yeah, we left off staff in there, didn't I? Okay, you're public.
Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. It was brought to my attention that the November 11th Campo meeting is scheduled for Veterans Day. Staff are recommending rescheduling the November meeting to the following Wednesday, which is November 18th, starting at 4:30 here in the Sierra Room. Staff will be reaching out to individual board members to ensure a quorum, but I did want to publicly announce that we're planning on moving that meeting. Thank you.
You bet. All right, I think now I can call for any motion for adjournment? So moved. So moved? What time, Brad, would you like to bring RTC back? 5 o'clock, a few minutes. Thank you, everybody. Good meeting.
For this meeting of the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission, today is Wednesday, September 9th. It is 5:03 PM, and we are in the Sierra Room at 851 East William Street. And I'd like to read on to the record public comment limitations. Although the RTC often provides an opportunity for additional public comment during each specific item designated for possible action on the agenda, public comment will be temporarily limited to the beginning of the agenda before any action is taken, and again at the end before adjournment. This policy will remain effective during the period of time the state of Nevada is under a state of emergency as declared by the governor due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is intended to achieve the efficient conduct of meetings while facilitating public participation via video conference and telephonic means. So now that we have that on the record, can we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Bonkowski.
Here.
Vice Chair Kimbrough. Here. Commissioner Bagwell. Here. Commissioner McQuarrie.
Here.
Commissioner Stedfield. Here. Quorum is present.
Thank you. Agenda management notice. The chair may take items out of order, combine two or more agenda items for consideration or remove an item or delay discussion at any time. Do we have any changes to the agenda tonight?
None from staff, thank you.
Any from the members of the commission? Seeing and hearing none, the agenda will remain as published. We are now on agenda item 3, disclosures. Any member of the RTC board have any disclosures to make tonight? I see all no's for the record. All right, we're on first public comment, agenda item 4. Desi, is there anybody on the line for public comment?
There is no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, approval of the minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes. If everybody has had a chance to read and review those, I will accept a motion, an individual motion for both August 5th and August 12th.
I move to approve the minutes of August 5th, 2020, with a correction on item 1 from PM to AM.
Do we have a motion and a second? Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The vote is 5-0. Moving on to the minutes of August 12th.
I move to approve the minutes of August 12th, 2020, as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The vote is also 5-0 for the minutes of August 12th. We are now on agenda item 6, public meeting items. Item 6A for discussion only, informational presentation regarding the fiscal year 2020 transportation activities. Lucia, this one's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. As I do every year, I've provided an annual summary of RTC activities. The Carson City Public Works Transportation Division consists of 6 full-time employees, including a transportation manager, a senior transportation planner, a transportation engineer, and 2 transportation planner analysts. And a transit coordinator, excuse me. These employees are primarily responsible for seeking outside grant funding to support transportation activities, coordinating the operation of Jump Around Carson Transit, and supporting planning and implementation of capital projects for transportation. The report does summarize fiscal year 20 activities from July 1, 2019 through June 30, 2020. On the funding side, staff work with the RTC to get approval of a development agreement template for pro rata contributions. To date, 1 agreement has been executed, and staff are in discussions on 5 additional agreements for a total of $318,650 in additional anticipated revenue to support 2 capital projects, and those are the realignment of Snyder Avenue for a potential signal at Appian on South Carson, and then the Ormsby connector from the Elbow up to Winnie. On the grant application side, staff developed and transmitted 3 competitive discretionary grant applications. Of those, 1 has been awarded, and that was to double our annual grant funding to support our senior bus pass program for Jump Around Carson Transit. The other 2 applications were those transportation alternative programs, the TAP grants. One was for safe routes to school, and one was for multi-use path rehabilitation and extension of the linear ditch multi-use path at Roop Street connecting to South Carson. So we are eagerly awaiting notice of those two applications in the next couple months. On the capital project side, we regularly report capital projects in the project status report that comes to the RTC every other month. During fiscal year 2022 capital projects were reported in those reports, and those are mapped in Exhibit 1 of this staff report. I will note there's a kind of a triple line shown on the map downtown near Robinson Street. The top line of that, for whatever reason, it should have been marked for Washington Street. But then Robinson Street and Caroline, which is just to the south, that's roadway dollars being contributed to the Robinson Sewer utility project for the road reconstruct. So there's that. We also use this opportunity to provide an annual report on pavement condition. The pavement condition annual report card is shown. I did want to note that the data reflects increases to Regional Road Pavement Condition Index, the PCI, in the performance districts where we have invested with our approved payment management plan. You'll see District 1 from 2019 and District 2 from 2020. Those payment condition indexes, those go up a little bit, right, to reflect our investment. You'll also note that District 4 Regional Road PCI has seen an increase, and that's attributed to the currently under construction South Carson Street project. Since we've been tracking this in 2015, condition has decreased citywide by 10%, and local road condition has deteriorated by 15%. What happens when condition decreases is that the cost to maintain those roads gets more and more higher and higher. So there is a real cost to inadequately funding our roads. And you see that here in the payment condition index. I will keep going. On the policy development side, we did work with you, the RTC, to develop a speed limit policy to be more transparent, reproducible, and consistent with how we evaluate speed limits. We have had one internal request for speed limit review since development of the policy a couple of months ago. This was an internal request. The landfill is looking at doing a reconstruction of Flint Drive. And our operations manager said, let's take a look at it. Is 25 miles an hour the right speed? So our traffic engineer looked at it. He wrote up a great memo, and we're looking at increasing that speed limit with the opening of the new road up to 35 miles an hour. And then on the communication side, we're always trying to be better about communicating what we do. We did make an update to the interlocal cooperative agreement between the Carson City Board of Supervisors, RTC, and CAMPO this year to streamline approvals and make sure we're doing everything the way we all want them to happen. So that was updated, and then we also updated the bi-monthly project status report and the template of that to be more transparent. We did get a request last month to show distances on projects in those maps, so we're looking at continuing to refine those. Some additional activities not reported, because they sort of straddled 2 years, was the work that this body and the Carson City Board of Supervisors did for implementation of the Senate Bill 48 5-cent per gallon diesel tax. That went into effect on August 1st. And then additionally, there was a big RFP and a transition for our Jump Around Carson transit operator. We had a successful transition, and that new group went live on August 31st. So wanted to report that as well. I'll stop there, but happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions from the commissioners? Mark?
A couple of questions. For this payment condition index, it was 6% last year and it's 15% for 5 years, so things are going fast. So I don't think there is from sitting on this board, but if you start losing, it doesn't matter what district you're in, if your road's down to falling totally apart, I mean, you totally sound, well, sorry, your district doesn't get that work until 5 more years down the road or 4 more years. Is there some level in here that can change that so we don't let some street just fall apart? Tough question.
That's the money question.
Yeah.
Mr. Vice Chair. No, I mean, when you get to, poor condition, at that point, you're reconstructing the roads. So whether it's PCI of, 40 or 0, it's very expensive. And so the goal is to keep those good roads good, right? Dirk talks about it all the time. When you can do those slurry seals and maintain that asphalt and keep the water out, that's how you extend the life. And so, we're at a spot where each year, and, Dirk will talk about it in a later agenda item tonight, we look at roads like Center Drive in South Carson City, and that road really needs to be looked at. But that's now on the list of projects that's probably double our annual budget, our whole budget for RTC. And so absent additional funding, we'll have more and more roads on that list that we can't even really do anything for.
Do you have that list so that when the public comes in, you can show them, these streets are falling apart, but the way the funding is and the way we manage this is when we're going to talk to you?
I don't know that we've ever put together a list like that, but that is something that might be interesting.
Well,
We
you
could look
lost
into that.
23% in District 2 and local roads, and that's a lot of roadway concern to me, I would think. And because of the rotation period, which I support that, but it just seems like there's some sections where it's, I don't know the word, where it breaks up into little pieces and it's already just a lift. So there must be a system in place for patchwork, I guess, versus repaving. If it falls
Alligator.
like a Band-Aid for those situations.
Lucia, if I could, the issue at hand is how do you turn $2.5 million a year in available revenue into $15 million a year, which is the need. And we are so far apart between generated revenue and actual need that there are going to be some streets that we will never be able to address. And the board has done what they can. We increased the waste management franchise fee by 3%, which generates money that goes to roads. We took excess funds from the V&T bond payments. We had a surplus there, so we've transferred that over and we're using that. We've done general fund transfers. We added the diesel tax. These are small incremental changes to try to generate more revenue. And we're still only going to generate, 15 to 20% of the actual need. So until the state and federal governments are willing to help us out, we're doing what we can, but we're not going to solve this problem on our own. I mean, we're just way too far apart on that issue.
Yeah, it's just a bummer to see, some sections, if it unravels, you're almost grading it to a dirt road again or something. If you
Yeah,
can't repair it.
we've had that discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
That there
that's
may
so
be
serious.
roads, right, there may be roads that we need to just grind up and leave them as gravel.
So that's kind of my point here is that, are we prepared for that? Looking at this, when you have that kind of, 6% in the last year of local roads, if you keep the next 5, that'd be 30% over the 15, that'd be like 45% in the
Well,
next.
I think it's important too that the word gets out to the public gets educated on what the real issues are so that the next time there is a ballot opportunity to address this at the local level, the vote turns out a little differently. But when you put a ballot measure on the ballot and it gets defeated, basically 80% to 20%,
80?
then,
Is that what it was?
yeah, it was,
I
right.
thought it was like 60 or something.
Yeah, and then, the public either doesn't understand or they do understand and they're sending us a message. And if that message is that they don't want to pay for the roads to be fixed, then the roads won't be fixed. That's our reality. So we do what we can with what we have.
And when you say we say Board of Supervisors.
The Board of Supervisors.
So I
right.
understand that.
The
So
buck stops with us.
that's all right. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's why we elected you. What I'm kind of drawn towards here is that this list I was talking about. Well, it's not to put a load on staff, but if somebody comes in and said, we're not due for 4 more years and our roads just degraded 23%, what's your plan? You can't tell them, I'm not doing anything, and let it just unravel and full of pocket holes.
It's exactly what I tell them, because that's the truth.
But
And
I
I
mean,
think
they
they
would
need to
come in
know
and
that.
grade it is what they do. They'd come in and just tear it all up, but there's no money to even do that.
So
I'm just preparing us for that inevitable.
to
but we're not ready
Supervisor,
yet.
right, to Supervisor Bonkowski's point, the budget approval is with the board, but the payment management plan, policy directives come from this group with the payment management plan. So should, we we start getting closer and more of those roads start failing, we will have to have that policy discussion here where we say, do we want to set aside a certain portion or a piece of our money every year to grade roads, right? Right now, we don't have that set aside, but that could be a policy direction we go in the future. Right now, the policy direction in the payment management plan says we prioritize roads with higher speeds, higher volumes that serve more people with safety concerns to mitigate liability, right? And
By district, though,
the most
right?
users by district.
Right.
But because of that, we don't spend money on local roads. And that's what we tell our public. But that's a policy direction that, certainly could be discussed at this body with an amendment or the next payment management plan.
That's kind of what I'm getting to here, so that we're ahead of the game here, because if this transportation bill becomes a nightmare for us because of COVID, we'd be prepared to explain this to the public, and we were prepared rather than go, oh, well, we'll have to discuss that now. It's like we should discuss it sooner than later, you'd think, to support if anybody ever wanted to put the bond issue out again or something, that we got the metrics, we got this, these streets are this, and what you kind of have that, but the specifics helps because people know what street they live on. They might not necessarily know they even live in District 3. So it's just a point to be thought of and taken, that RTC has a lot of responsibility coming its way, and it's not the Board of Supervisors' fault. Essentially, how do we make this as effective as we can with the dollars that we don't have? I mean, I don't know what other communities do. I mean, towns in Nevada had dirt roads for years because they knew they couldn't afford the infrastructure, like Lovelocks and the Battle Mountains, and so they get the funds and then they can't maintain it. This is what we're going back again to. It's just
That's
I
exactly
think
right.
it's discussion that we just need to have. That's all.
And I've said it before, I'll just say it one more time for this item, is the feds will never come in and save our local roads. Federal money isn't eligible to be spent on local roads. So no matter how many grants staff get, we will never be able to reconstruct Desatoya, for example, over by Empire Elementary, which is a local road and in complete need of reconstruction, right? That doesn't even make it on the list, even though we know it needs a reconstruct. There's just simply no funding for local roads.
That's almost the headline for the story, essentially. So I hope you don't mind me taking up the time of that, but it was kind of, it was an opportunity to do that. So I thank you for that, and that's all I'm going to say. Oh, I had one more question, sorry. The Ormsby connector to Winnie Lane. Is that, you said you're working with a developer. What is the Ormsby connector?
No, I appreciate you asking. So there's long been planned a connection where Ormsby heads northbound from Kings Street.
Right,
And there's a bend right there where it turns into Ash Canyon.
right?
In that bend, there's been planned a connection up to Winnie. So Ormsby would go straight up to Winnie. The city already owns the right-of-way. It's just been an unfunded project. So when Anderson Ranch came through Planning Commission this past year, we asked them to pay
I remember
do a
that.
pro rata
It
contribution.
wasn't real popular either, I don't think. But all right, thank you. That lets me know what that was. All right, thanks. I'm sorry, Brad. Thanks.
Additional questions? Chaz, you have questions? No? Greg? Sorry. Okay. Lucia, do you by chance have an estimate of what the total all roads pavement index would be if we excluded the 20 and 30% increases in District 4 because of South Carson Street? So if we take that one project off the table, I think that gives us a truer picture of what's happened to our local road system. Do you have a way to generate that number, or do you have that number?
I don't have it at the top of my head. I believe that I want to say it was a 61 for 2020 if we didn't do it. But I can get back with Dirk and give you the actual number and run the citywide without that improvement, and we can get back to you.
Well, right now, even with that, it's a 58, so I suspect it's got to be lower than 61.
Oh, I was looking at the wrong one. Yeah.
Yeah, citywide all roads is the number that I'm looking for, excluding the regional road increases for District 4, which is South Carson Street.
Right. I want to say the regional roads, see where they say 75? I want to say they were 61 without that, without the just on the regional roads, but I'll have to confirm.
Right, so that would be 14 points for regional roads in District 4, but we've got to average it throughout all 5 districts citywide, so.
Yep, to get you an
won't have
overall.
it, yeah.
I can get that for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, last call for questions on this item. All right, Hearing none, that's a non-action item, so we will move to item 6B. For possible action, discussion and possible action regarding the final 2020 Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan. Kelly, you're up.
Thank you. Western Nevada Safe Routes to School endeavors to equitably plan for safe routes for children and their families by engaging, encouraging, educating, engineering, and evaluating. The Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan encompasses each of these goals. Carson City Public Works has ensured the success of the engineering and programmatic projects described in the master plan by incorporating it into the long-range 2050 CAMPO Regional Transportation Plan. Western Nevada Safe Routes to School will use this plan as a guide to cooperate on similar safe routes to school master plans within Douglas, Lyon, and Story counties. Cole Pfeiffer is here again from Headway Transportation to provide updates and a summary of the final Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan. Cole, let me see.
Thank you, Kelly.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I'm going to just share my screen, or is it up? I don't know if Kelly's running it.
It's up.
Oh, it's up. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all very much for this opportunity to talk through the Safe Routes to School Master Plan, which I've talked through the final. We talked about this in July, about the draft, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of what's included in the plan and what we did to put the plan together. So next slide. So as Kelly mentioned, the overall goal of the project was to improve safety for walking and cycling within about a 1 mile radius of all public elementary and middle schools in Carson City. And then we also expanded that to include bus stop locations as well, once we identified that bus stop safety is certainly a major concern. The process that we went through to develop the plan at each school, we met with the school principals and staff, observed the pickup and dropout activities to identify pinch points and areas of concern, and then also analyzed relevant data, so crash data and then vehicle speed data on higher speed roadways around some of the schools. We also gathered some really good input from parents and students through a parent survey for parents at all, with students at all of the 8 study schools, and then also conducted a survey of students at the 2 middle schools. From that effort, we identified 3 major focus areas. They were identified by both parents and students as the top 3 areas of focus, and those were improving safety of intersections and crossings, improving the sidewalks and pathways, and then also reducing traffic speeds along the routes to school. So we used those to help guide our development of our recommendations, and those fell along the 6 E's of Safe Routes to School planning, including engineering, education, engagement, encouragement, equity, and evaluation. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just talk about the engineering recommendations first and foremost. So we broke the engineering recommendations into 3 different tiers based on their timeline for implementation, essentially. So the first tier is comprised of about 26 projects focused on being rapidly implemented to provide an immediate benefit for safety. These include a number of different improvements at bus stops to make drivers more aware that bus stops are there and help them slow down and recognize students are around those areas. And additionally, it will can be implemented quite quickly due to the low overall cost. The total planning level cost estimate is about $204,000 for those full tier projects. The second tier really represents, as the name indicates, the core of projects that will be focused on improving safety for walking and cycling. These were prioritized based on their overall proximity to school, benefit to underserved communities, and if they addressed the focus areas identified through the survey or any specific areas identified through the survey, such as a specific intersection or the like. Based on that prioritization process, we broke those projects out into 3 different timeframes: near term, medium term, long term, to give an indication of when they should be implemented based on their overall priority. And then the final tier 3, the aspirational projects, really representing kind of an idealized network of bicycle facilities. They're not tied to a timeline for specific implementation due to their somewhat transformational nature. The overall design concepts included in them need a little bit more analysis before they're implemented, so they're not tied to a specific implementation timeframe. The changes that occurred from the draft to the final, just a number here that I'll touch on. For in the Tier 1 projects, we added 1 bus stop location, 1 bus stop enhancement on Deer Run Road, right south of Brunswick County Road, to improve driver awareness of students waiting for bus stops along that curve. And then additionally, in Tier 2, in that long-term portion of projects, we added another multimodal bridge over I-580. This kind of pairs with another multimodal bridge project that conceptually, due to just overall funding constraints, likely one of those projects and not both would be constructed. So the overall dollar amount for Tier 2 projects is 42.1, but it's important to recognize that a quarter of that is represented by those 2 pedestrian bridge projects over I-580. We also addressed comments from the board, and then some minor comments from school principals as well. It makes us a tweak here and there to some projects in front of the schools. Go to the next slide. The programmatic recommendations really help to bolster the engineering recommendations and give a holistic program of projects. From the draft to the final, these didn't change. But I just want to touch on them again. They really focus on standardizing the school speed zones, which Public Works is already engaging in identifying and getting some standardization to the signage. Also, looking at bolstering the existing safety education programs, expanding upon them, and also expanding upon the existing encouragement of programs such as the Walk to School Day programs, Nevada Move programs, and then possibly implementing a golden sneaker activity, get some fun competition between schools and between classrooms for walking and biking to school. And then looking at increasing school zone engagement, having some direct engagement with law enforcement, just to remind parents, teachers, drivers, everybody who goes through a school zone, how to be a good pedestrian, how to be a good user of the roadway in front of the school, and then some ways to monitor the implementation and the outcomes of the plan itself. And then go to the last slide. After the last slide. So the full plan includes a lot more than just the recommendations included in it. Those are really marked PDF items, but there are a lot of other important items I just wanted to touch on quickly. First and foremost, the Safe Routes to School Infrastructure Design Toolbox really represents the national best practices for designing safe routes to school infrastructure. This is intended to supplement design concepts and recommendations included in the plan and any type of safe route to school focused infrastructure going forward. Additionally, the plan includes all the project data that went into putting the plan together, from the vehicle speed data, crash data, and the like, and then also a summary of all the survey responses, and also includes the project prioritization process, which will be easy to replicate in the future when the plan will be updated. And then there's a lot in the document. It's a pretty big document to flip through. So to make it easy for people who are just concerned about one school or the other, we put together what's called a school profile for each study school that will allow people to just focus on their existing conditions and recommendations for the school that they're really concerned about. So that is a quick overview. The final document for Safe Routes to School, and I'm excited to take any questions or comments that you have.
Any questions? Jazz, you have questions?
Yeah, I do. First of all, I think it was a very thorough document, much needed, and some much needed guidance. And I particularly liked the toolbox. I thought that was a very good summary of best practices that can be used, not just for Safe Routes to School, but throughout the city when we do particularly non-motorized transportation enhancements, and also through Parks and Open Space, who use some of the similar tools in the toolbox there. But I did have a question. Are there dollars available through Safe Routes to School to fund improvements? Do they come from competitive grants, or is there an allocation through NDOT for monies that might be used to implement some of the recommendations?
I don't know if I heard three. There are grants available. A TA set aside would be a potential avenue to pursue for kind of something outside of a programmatic item. As far as specific funds and whatnot above and beyond that, where those are currently allocated.
Yeah, I would just add that the Safe Routes to School program is funded through the same transportation alternative program as what we fund typically, we're in the last few years, for the freeway multi-use paths. So there's nothing, we could absolutely continue to fund our multi-use paths, and then also ask a grant application for Safe Routes to Schools improvements. It's just a matter of finding the 5% local match for that specific, that 20% local match for that specific funding source.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, and then as the RTP is implemented through the districts, I am assuming we'll be looking at improvements in the Safe Routes to School master plan to include in projects for upcoming years. And then particularly, and I guess I know this is separate from the actually RTP funds, but also the CDBG funds, the sidewalk improvements, I'm sure we'll be coordinating with recommendations in the Safe Routes to School master plan. I guess that's both a comment and a question. I think the answer is going to be yes.
That's correct. The goal is to streamline and coordinate as much as possible. And with this comprehensive plan, staff are able to, anytime there's a project, whether it's a sewer replacement and they're looking at patching a big trench, or it's a capital project on East 5th Street where we can now say, oh, wait, there were flashers recommended over there by the middle school. We can coordinate those and bring them up front and discuss them in a complete streets manner.
Yeah, I think you've done a good job of that, actually. So, good job. So I noticed a couple of specific comments. So I noticed on page 1.1 that 60% of parents give as the reason that they don't like their students to walk or ride to school as it's too far to school to walk. And I was just curious, do you know what, and I realize this is a big range here, but what is considered by most parents as too far? I mean, is that 2 blocks or is that half a mile?
It like you said, it's a big range. It depends on the parent. It depends on, I think, the parent's experience, what the available options are to them. I think a typical range that's kind of used is about a mile for walking, maybe 2 miles for older students for middle school or high school, but that's typically the range that we find would be acceptable to walk. It really, again, depends on the area, the parents and students who would be walking and the like. But that's kind of a general rule of thumb. That's why we stuck to a mile, really focusing in on the area that would be most affected by or have the largest number of pedestrians and students walking to school.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity for some education as we go forward with some of the, non-structural improvements with some of the programs that are mentioned in the report to encourage parents that, it's okay for the kid to walk half a mile. Another thing that I, specifically in the report, I didn't see mention of something that I've heard in the past is a barrier to riding bicycles to school, and that is the safety of them at school. If there's a place to lock them up where they don't get stolen. And I didn't specifically notice whether there was an evaluation of bike racks at the various schools. I may have just missed it.
Yeah, it wasn't specifically called out, and we didn't see it as a major issue. What we saw is that the number of bicycles that were attached to the bike racks was pretty minimal. And from talking to at a number of schools at Empire specifically, there were a larger number of bike parking available, but there were spaces for students to have their bicycles locked up, as well as their scooters, which is kind of a trend nowadays.
Okay. Yeah, and this may be more a question for Lucia. So I noticed in the report too, one of the other main reasons that kids don't walk to school is there's gaps in the sidewalk, or they actually come from a neighborhood that doesn't have any sidewalks at all. And I know. Well, I guess my question is there a blanket policy to require sidewalks on all new development, Lucia, or does that depend on the type of development? I live in an area where there aren't any sidewalks, and it was only built a little over 20 years ago. And there are many older neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks either.
There is, short answer, there's not a requirement to build new sidewalks, but when a major project comes in and staff are looking at permitting it and conditioning it, where there's a known gap in the sidewalk system, we will oftentimes request that as a condition. Or if it's a inadequate condition of an existing sidewalk, big heaves or missing ADA compliant curb ramps, we'll request the developer to bring those up to standard.
And Dan Stuckey, correct me.
But within development itself, are sidewalks required there, or is that open for discussion depending on the sort of flavor of the development? Because some go for narrow streets and no sidewalks.
Chaz, I believe, and Dan Stuckey is here, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that all new development requires sidewalks. It may not be sidewalks on both sides of the street. That depends on the whether it's an interior street, whether the width of the street, whether there's parking on the street. Dan, if you could maybe clarify this for us all.
Sure. Dan Stuckey, Deputy Public Works Director for the record. So there is a section in our Carson City Municipal Code. I don't remember. I should actually know this off the top of my head because we always deal with it. But there is a section in there for, even for tenant improvements, if the frontage, the sidewalk, ADA, ramps, those things are not up to standard, we can require them through even a simple tenant improvement per the municipal code to upgrade those to current ADA standards. With any new development, they're required to do frontage improvements, sidewalk, curb and gutter. If there is, obviously if it's in a rural area where there's no sidewalk and no plans for sidewalk, no sidewalk within, blocks of the development, then it's not necessarily required there. But if there's any sort of connectivity within that block, we can require it through the Carson City Municipal Code.
And there's also some grant funding available on those tenant improvement projects. So if a tenant who isn't expecting that to be included in their tenant improvement costs, gets hit with that condition, there is some limited grant fund available through redevelopment.
Yep.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Overall, I thought it was a really good document. I'm pleased we have it going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Chaz. Any questions? Greg? No? Lori? Mark, go ahead.
My only comment is that we're very fortunate in Carson City to have this open space tax that So if you looked at this plan with their trail plan, if anything overlays, like maybe the bridge over 580, then there's a good opportunity for a match on the local level. So in the future, if maybe the two plans could meld each other and look at opportunities when because there is funding in open space to get some of these done, but serve two purposes, safe routes and the local trail plan and the connectivity to the trails and stuff. So that's my only encouragement, that wasn't done with this. So there's a trail plan here and there's a safe routes. So I'll put them on the same shelf and then have somebody, since they have a trail coordinator, maybe Greg might be a good person to look at melding these two together during his winter duties, maybe, or something. Just my recommendation. And it's a wonderful plan. I mean, you couldn't get any more comprehensive than that for the future. But we didn't plan, as I said earlier, for COVID, and all of a sudden kids are walking to school again. So that wasn't part of this plan, to figure that all of a sudden you got a huge increase in kids walking to school. And that might be a different interview with the parents at that point, because might be because they have no choice. So it makes it even more important for us to get them to school safe and know where the danger points are, so that if you could inform the parents if you start seeing problems about those things. So just a different world we live in. So thank you for that, and maybe somehow somebody could talk to Greg about melding it with you two. Since you're going to be here for a while now, you and Greg could work this out.
And it was
4 more months, that's right.
And I was thinking along the same lines as Mark, only with, I think that we need to look at this to see if any of the rapid flashing beacon projects are in areas where maybe NDOT could look at it as a project. We also have redevelopment funds that could theoretically be available. There's different funding sources out there, as Mark said, where maybe we partner up on some of these projects to see if we can get different funding sources together to fund them.
One more point, Brad, when you get done, sorry. Just one more point that, RTP is there for the money, the Rec Trails program to the state, and then Land and Water, which both of those have a huge increase to the state, huge, never been that big before, that bill that just passed. So there's a huge opportunity for more trail, and Land and Water, which is recreational, anything that could, like the bridge over 580, that's just an example that comes to mind, but anything that comes on the recreational side that's part of these trails, huge increase in funds coming to the state from all over the country. That's the biggest bill ever passed for trails. So it's time for, Greg can probably educate you on some of that stuff too, because he should be on top of that. And there's a cool name for the bill, and I can't remember what it is, but like the Great Outdoor Act or something. So it's really a wonderful thing for these types of programs too. And I don't know if Safe Routes is part of it, but I do know RTP and Land and Water is.
We'll look
Then
into that. Thank you.
I would also note too that it's much easier for us when we're looking at $42 million in recommended projects to fund 20% of that on the match side. So obviously $42 million is not something that we're going to come up with. So if we're going to be able to do some of these projects and get more parents to feel safe about their children going to school, as Chaz mentioned, that's what these projects are intended to do. So then the kids do get out and walk that half mile or 1 mile, because right now one of the barriers is crossing major streets. These projects will alleviate that, allowing the parents to hopefully feel good about having their kids either ride or walk to school. I would ask, Cole, just that before you print the final copies of this, that you have it proofread one more time. So if you turn to the executive summary, on the executive summary, you have table E1 and you have figure E1. It's very confusing. If maybe you could renumber figure E1 or clarify that so that you don't have similar numbers, alphanumeric numbers, directing people to different parts of the report. And then If you turn to page, these are just examples. I only went through a few pages, but if you go to page E4, under programmatic recommendations, it needs an apostrophe in the 6 E's in the last line. And then page 1-1, you have 5 E's. If you look down on the left, lower, it says the 6 E's approach. And then in the second line, it says the 5 E's. There's just things like that. There's over on that same page, the first paragraph in the far right column, has roughly tripled from 5% to almost 17%, and the 5% is alpha and the 17% is numeric. So it's just little formatting and typographical things. I just think that reports like this, we spend a lot of money on them, and I think that they reflect on the entity that funds them, and I just want to make sure that the final product that we get is appropriate, if you could. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
Hey, Brad, but he explains the 6 E's in the next sentence, so.
Yeah, I saw that, but those are just examples of things that could either be clarified or
confusing.
fixed. Yeah. Yep. All right, if there are no additional questions or discussion on this item, then I would bring this item back to the board and entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion or did someone in the room make the motion?
Go ahead, Chaz.
I move to support the 2020 Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan as presented with typographical corrections.
Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. And Cole, I would say that I agree with everybody else up here. The report is very comprehensive. I had no issues at all with any of the content. Again, it's just a suggestion if we could just clean it up a little bit. Having said that, having said that for the record, then all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. The vote is 5-0 to approve. Thank you all. We are now moving on to item 6C. 6C for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding direction to pursue 5 proposed transportation infrastructure projects in fiscal year 2021 for Performance District 3 as funding permits. Dirk, are you online?
I am online. I am trying to share the screen. Can you guys see a slideshow up?
No.
But Kelly has it, and she's
Now
going to
it's
go
up.
for you.
Now it's up.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Dirk Warren, for the record. So I'm going to start with a quick background on the pavement management plan. Pavement plan was approved back in April of 2018, and it's essentially established 5 performance districts and a 5-year rotating schedule. Additionally, the plan laid out a few objectives to have predictable use of roadway funding, to improve transparency, to maintain flexibility, and to target some cost-saving strategies, and to provide a framework for tracking pavement conditions, setting performance targets, and to better understand and justify funding needs. So on the screen is a map of the 5 performance districts. So just kind of give you a little bit of history. Back in fiscal year 19, we started with District 1, which are the red lines. Fiscal year 20 was District 2, which is the purple lines. Now for fiscal year 21, we are in District 3, which are the green lines. Right here, the southeast side of Carson City. So this is the annual pavement condition, which I won't go into. It was touched on 2 items ago. On screen is a schedule outlining the pavement management plan. Right now, we're in the project selection and public posting phase of the plan. If the RTC grants approval to pursue the projects for District 3, we'll then move on to design, bidding, and execution as it's laid out on the plan. The plan also outlines a set of criteria that we use to help evaluate the projects. I'm going to go into this in just a moment. For the fiscal year 2021, it was about $849,000 from the Transportation Infrastructure Fund that's available for capital projects. So going into the project evaluation process on the next slide, sorry. So the first, we used a two-step process, and the two-step process first looked at pavement condition, roadway functional classification, safety, traffic volume, construction efficiencies, and then industry standards for scheduling preventative maintenance. So that was one step, and then we ranked the projects, and then we took the projects that were ranked higher, and we applied a second step of the evaluation. And this is where we looked at the ADA transition plan and safe routes to school. So, for example, if we had a project, for example, 5th Street, received additional points because it was going to allow us to be on 5th Street and address some of the improvements that were recommended in the safe routes to school plan. We also score projects higher if they are located on city bus route system. We also evaluate projects from a work history standpoint, trying to make sure that we can distribute funds throughout the district instead of focusing on the funds on the same road every 5 years. And then lastly, we also coordinate with other roadway utilities to achieve a dig once approach. So all the projects that are proposed today have been vetted through the sewer department division as well as the water division and stormwater to make sure that we have a dig once approach. So going to the next slide. So here are the proposed projects for District 3. So we have 4 pavement preservation projects. Deer Run between US 50 and about a half-mile north of Sedge Road. Second pavement preservation project is Old Clear Creek Road between Casa Grande and US 395, and this is right in front of Costco. Third is Lampa Lane. This is between US 50 and Menlo Drive. Fourth is Snyder Avenue between Bigelow Drive and Center Drive. Then we have one rehabilitation project, and that's 5th Street between Fairview Drive and the eastern extent, Marsh Road. And this project would include a combination of rehabilitation and pavement preservation treatments. So moving on to the next slide. So this is just, I have a few maps of District 3 that I wanted to share with you all. And so these are the 5 projects. The surface treatment projects are shown in orange, and then the rehabilitation project is shown in red. This is an overview of District 3. We show the pavement condition for each of the project limits. And the projects range from satisfactory to poor. Moving on to the next slide. This is just an overview of the functional classification. All the projects proposed are located on collector roadways. We evaluated these roads on volume, so we wanted to share that information with you all. As you can see, Old Clear Creek next to Costco had the highest one with about 7,600 ADTs, which is average daily trips. And then followed by Lampa Lane, 5th Street, Snyder Avenue, and Deer Run. We also looked at safety. Safety is one of the criteria, so we looked at crashes. And as you can see, all the projects do have some type of injury crash associated with them. Luckily, none of them have a fatal crash. And what this does is it says, hey, we're going to be in this area. Are there opportunities to improve safety? So if we get approval, we'll be moving forward with design, and we'll be looking at these crashes and seeing what we can do from a design standpoint to improve that road. As I mentioned, we are, thank you, Kelly. As I mentioned earlier, we do try and have a dig once approach. So we do have a list of all the capital improvement projects for public works, and we made sure that we're not proposing a project such as Fifth Street, that's going to have a 25-year lifespan. And then we're going to have to come into that road in another 5 years and make some improvements to the water line. So one thing to note is that we did talk with the water division, and for Fifth Street, there's going to be some water line improvements that they're going to want to take advantage of if that road is being replaced. So this is an overview of the projects. And what we did here is we just kind of provided a little bit of information, showed some information on how the project is scored. On the bottom two rows is the score, and then also there's a ranking. So I do want to go through some comments. All this information was provided to traffic, the Transportation Resource Advisory Committee for Carson City. We did receive some comments, so I want to go through them now. One of them was recommended to replace one of the projects with South Lampa. South Lampa is the road between Edmonds Drive and Fairview, and it has heavy use. That road is used to access the I-580 ramps for the most part on Fairview. So staff did evaluate that road. The pavement condition is very poor, and it does have a higher than average volume due to its proximity to I-580. However, given the current budget, we would have to replace Fifth Street with it, so we couldn't afford both projects. The estimated cost to reconstruct or rehabilitate South Lampa Drive is approximately $500,000. Additionally, there is undeveloped and underdeveloped land along South Lampa, which means that there is an opportunity in the future for the road improvements to be borne by a developer. Which is different than Fifth Street, which is developed. So for that reason, South Lampa did not make the proposed list. Another comment we heard recommended rehabilitating the section of Deer Run directly north of Sedge Drive, and staff originally planned on doing this. Unfortunately, the additional cost would require removal of either Fifth Street or multiple preservation projects. Given the volumes on Deer Run, staff did not include this in the proposal. Another comment that we heard from traffic had to do with comments that recommended incorporating flashing lights on Fifth Street, which is something that we'll be able to incorporate during the design phase if Fifth Street is approved as a project. Another comment was recommended Combs Canyon between Timberline and Lakeview. This roadway is outside of District 3, so we didn't put it on the proposed list. Lastly, we did hear some comments recommending improvements to Center Drive, just south of Snyder Avenue. This road is in very poor condition and would require reconstruction along with substantial sidewalk improvements. The road is in District 3 and it did make the original short list. However, due to the volumes and the limited funds, it didn't make the list of proposed projects. This project is listed on the Regional Transportation Plan as an unfunded project in the hopes that we might be able to acquire grant funding or work with the tribe to receive funding to help rehabilitate that road. Lastly, I want to note some of the improvements that took place in District 3 for fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 18. And so these 2 years, 17, 18, were prior to the pavement management plan, but there's quite a bit of projects that took place. So I just wanted to share that list with you all. So there was a pavement preservation treatment on Fairview Drive between I-580 and US 50. There was a preservation treatment on Edmonds Drive between Fairview Drive and Snyder. Additionally, there are preservation treatments on a portion of Snyder Avenue just west of Edmonds Drive. There was a preservation treatment project on Fifth Street between Fairview, moving west to Solomon Road. And then there was also a mill and overlay on Airport Road between Buckeye Way and Fifth Street. And then lastly, there was a reconstruction project, as you all know, on Sierra Vista Lane. So that concludes my comments on the proposed projects for District 3. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Dirk? Go ahead, Mark, and then Lori.
I have one question on Deer Run. That a flap grant for access to sedge under the BLM lands, I was curious do flap grants allow you to do maintenance on roads, or does it have to be new construction?
Flat grants do need to be reconstruction or rehabilitation or a capital type project versus your maintenance project. So you could do a mill and overlay, but that could be a candidate for a flap grant due to its proximity to the federal land.
So my question is, I see we're doing about 849,000 in projects proposal. Is that a reduction because of less gas taxes coming in due to the COVID? I'm just,
That's
is this
correct.
less?
That's correct. So last year and the year before, we were about 1.2 million for transportation infrastructure, and we're down this year.
So may I ask, is any of the 5 projects you just discussed, would one of those projects normally have made it in this process if you had your $1.2 million? Do you already have a priority if you had your standard funding?
I'm going to answer first, and then Dirk can jump in and correct me. As I understand, we anticipate the cost for the 5th Street rehab to be far exceeding available budget. And then after that, we would look at that Deer Run Road because the incremental cost, if you're extending a surface treatment, plus I believe there's some patching, I think we could probably extend it a little bit. And then in my opinion, the South Lampa between Edmonds and Fairview would probably come next. We did get, I asked our traffic engineer to give us a preliminary cost estimate for that South Lampa. And with some sidewalk connectivity on the east side of the road, that there's a gap right there, not sidewalk on the whole thing, just fixing the gap. And the apron connections, we estimate we could do it. And the preliminary estimate was 500,000, but we've discussed and we think there may be some value engineering to get it down maybe to 400,000.
Thank you. I'd like to find ways, if we can, to keep the districts even throughout. I don't know, with all the, like you said, people aren't driving as much, so that's a reflection of what happens in gas tax. Our funding source is actually getting worse. We're not even staying even, so thank you.
Chaz, any questions?
No.
Thank you. Thank you. Lori asked my questions, so I don't have any additional questions. So I'll bring this back for any final comments or a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I move to approve submission of the, what? Let me start with the right motion. I move to direct staff to pursue the District 3 projects as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
Aye.
The vote is 5-0 to approve. All right, we are now on agenda item 6D. For possible action, discussion of possible action regarding a community development block grant application by the Public Works Department seeking $131,637 for ADA improvements along Colorado Street between California Street and Solomon Road. Dirk.
Thank you, Chair. Dirk Warren for the record. A little background, every year Public Works applies for a community development block grant funding grant. This is also known as CDBG funds. The past applications have involved some ADA improvements as well, which include North Carson Street, College Parkway, and Colorado Street between California Street and Solomon Road. The proposed grant application is seeking additional funds for Colorado Street, so for the Colorado Street project, and is requesting approximately $131,000 for ADA and sidewalk improvements. Originally, Public Works requested approximately $472,000, but only $340,000 was awarded. As a result, the Colorado Corridor project is, I mentioned that. The corridor project is between California Street and Solomon. The project will include construction of ADA curb ramps, additional sidewalk where it's missing, and a replacement of deteriorated sidewalk. This project was identified last year and again this year due to the proximity to high and medium density residential areas, proximity to the Alice Gallagher Elementary School, proximity to the two commercial corridors, South Carson Street and Fairview Drive, proximity to Carson City's jump around bus system. And then lastly, the ADA improvements will allow for the roadway rehabilitation work. As you all know, when a road is rehabilitated, ADA improvements are required, which means we need to upgrade all the existing curb ramps into compliance with the current ADA standards. Colorado Street is located in District 4, which happens in fiscal years 2022. So that concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Dirk on this item? Go ahead, Lori.
So just in a general, Dirk, don't we normally get 250 to 350,000 in CDBG sidewalk dollars? And so I see that this is only requesting 131. Are you anticipating there won't be as much money in CDBG? We won't be able to have a project that qualifies? I'm just questioning why only 131,637.
Commissioner, thank you. That's a good question. That is correct. Typically, your projects can range from 227 to 340. Last year, the reason why that was bumped up was because we do know that Parks and Recs was not applying for a grant. This year, they are applying for a grant. I think this, that was part of the rationale. We could, if directed, we would be happy to see if we can find another project. The funding limits for this year and last year are similar.
I'll just add to that. So I did ask Dirk the same question and asked if we could increase the request for this specific project, and the answer was, this is the maximum for this specific project that's eligible for use for this funding, is that net between what we originally requested and what we got. But there are other projects, certainly other sidewalk projects, and with direction from this board, we could potentially submit a second application.
Maybe what would be wonderful sometime is I don't really have a grasp on our sidewalk needs, and we have all these other plans, because it's difficult, in fairness, for me to say, should I knock out the Parks and Rec application over a sidewalk application here? It's difficult for me to have that answer because I don't have a grasp of the issue at hand. Do we need $1 million more and we can bring our sidewalks up to par? Do we want, similar to what we did with cars in the sheriff's department, do we want to try to focus so much per year on sidewalks? So maybe we just need a conversation that comes back here so that we have a general understanding, and maybe it has to even come to the Board of Supervisors level to discuss who's bringing in what applications for CDBG.
I really appreciate that comment. I think sidewalk needs off the top of my head are probably closer to 100 million, if not more.
Wow.
We had about 50 years worth of sidewalk work to do.
We have about,
Oh,
we
wow.
could continue replacing at the current rate. I think Dirk said for 200 years before we'd circle back or something. So this is a major need in this city, and concrete's expensive. But that's a great request, and we will bring it back.
But don't tell Jen I told you I might be prioritizing sidewalks over her project.
Well, we like to work
I sit
together.
on that committee
so there's
too.
opportunities to coordinate, for
To
sure.
be fair, the answer, if you don't request additional project funding, is going to be no, because you didn't ask. We have a grant review committee that is tasked with vetting all the grant applications and making recommendations to the Board of Supervisors for final approval. So my recommendation or suggestion would be that if you have additional shovel-ready projects ready to go, ask for the money and let the review committee do their work. And if they feel that it's fair to award Parks and Rec money for their project and reduce your award to just the $131,000, they will make that recommendation to the board, who will then take final action on it.
So with us not necessarily prepared, unless Dirk jumps in and corrects me, with a second project, if RTC is wanting to make some sort of motion, I don't believe the timing of the original interest letter of intent to CDBG will allow us to come back in October. But we certainly could. It'll just be past that deadline. So looking for direction in the motion.
So you're indicating we've already missed round one of the required notice that I'm going to request? We've missed a function?
With action tonight, between now and the October meeting there's a milestone. And so staff would need approval to submit, Dirk, correct me if it's like a letter of interest or that preliminary step between now and the October meeting.
The first step in the CDBG grant process is to make sure that you're eligible. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm happy to get back to you all on that. But it is sometime in October, and I forget where the October RTC meeting lands and the eligibility date, but it's really close. And so I can get back and check. I don't know off the top of my head.
The October meeting is the 14th.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't know on the CDBG environment.
Yeah, and I believe the eligibility for October, for the eligibility requirement phase for the CDBG is, I want to say October 15th, but I could be off by a day, and that's where they get really close.
Dirk, can I ask you to clarify your understanding of what we're required to submit for the eligibility? Is it just a high level of your project? For example, could staff submit something like additional sidewalk repair work in District 5?
We would have to, I believe we have to narrow it down to the project location. We would need to identify that these are ADA improvements because that is part of the eligibility, as in the project's going to serve limited clientele, which is related to the ADA. So we do need some information. Just trying to help the conversation. We could possibly look at some of the projects in the Safe Routes to School and kind of move in that direction. It helps.
And I believe that these projects have to meet some LMI or low to moderate income requirements, so we would have to have site-specific projects.
That's correct. And Mr. Martinovich just brought up and confirmed that the letters of intent are due September 25th.
Okay, lesson learned. Next year. Oh, no.
I'm not done thinking out loud here.
All right.
So-
Go ahead, Lori, and then back to Mark.
Sorry. Maybe part of the process could, in a motion, could say that you could submit a grant application up to $350,000 that we're authorizing from this board, so that the $131,637 is certainly part of it. But if you have another viable project that meets the conditions on your list and it wouldn't exceed the 350 mark, would that be sufficient enough for you to legally then go ahead and apply for the grant?
I believe so. Because this is just an intent, an original screening, I think we could bring back the project to RTC for approval to submit the application before the application's actually submitted, and still meet those requirements for grants.
And Dirk is shaking his head yes, or nodding his head yes.
Well, Todd's ready to talk.
Mr. District Attorney, jump right in there.
I need to jump in too to that conversation. With what you just proposed, Supervisor Bagwell, would be beyond the scope of the action item that you have before you. You're considering a project for $131,000 in the agenda title. And so authorizing more than that would exceed the scope of the agenda title, so you'd run into an open meeting law issue at that point.
However, it could be brought back as a separate item.
It could certainly be brought back as a separate item if that would work out with the timing.
And in a worst-case situation, we would be able to call an emergency meeting of the RTC to approve a single item by the end of the month.
Staff will explore options.
Okay.
We appreciate the additional direction in this discussion.
Mark?
The comment was, I'm so glad you said that. I was the process is not working right. It's a wonderful collaboration to say, you try for this piece and we'll try for this piece versus a process that would have been public and more transparent about the whole process, that what's more important to the voted representatives of the community. So I thought that was really excellent that that was brought up, and that it's all just process, and sometimes collaboration doesn't always work unless you put it out there for everybody to have it and see and let the public make the decision. So thank you. Good job. Excellent.
Greg or Chaz, any questions?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Okay. If there's no additional questions or comments, then I will bring this item back to the commission for an attempt at a motion.
Clarify, unless I heard wrong, what you're saying is we either approve it submit it at 131, 637, or don't approve it.
The clarification was
Right.
that the dollar amount and the location are both specified in the title of the agenda item.
So we're
Right.
stuck.
So you're.
So that's another lesson learned, right? Just lessons learned. Okay. And as stated,
Well, but you can also provide direction.
to maybe come back. Okay. I move to approve submission of the grant application as presented and direct staff to explore options for bringing additional grant requests forward in a timely manner.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The vote is 5-0 to approve. You have your direction. Okay, we are now on agenda item 7, internal communications and administrative matters. Todd, we were okay on that last one?
Yes, I can live with
Thank you. Item 7A, transportation managers report. Lucia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two brief items. One is just a housekeeping item. The November 11th RTC meeting was scheduled for Veterans Day. It's the second Wednesday in November. Staff are recommending shifting that meeting to the following Wednesday, November 18th, alongside CAMPO, which is also recommended to be shifted. Staff are going to move forward with that. We will reach out to board members individually to ensure a quorum, of course, but wanted to note that on the record. Additionally, the Colorado Street project, there's been a lot of discussion on it. I think there's no question it's a good project. We just wanted to give an update to RTC that we're initiating scoping on a corridor kind of public outreach, neighborhood engagement study to see what can we do with Colorado Street. I don't know that this body or anyone else wants to maintain enough asphalt for an airplane that's never coming. I think there may be better things to do with that right-of-way, particularly in light of the multimodal investments in South Carson and on the freeway multi-use path, which comes out at Colorado. There may be some great east-west connectivity options to look at landscaping, beautification, slowing speeding, safety improvements, those types of things. So RTC is funding that small study to have a consultant help us make sure we're appropriately engaging the residents and making sure we're meeting their needs. That concludes my report.
Any questions on the transportation managers report? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 7B, street operation activity report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Key items for this report, which is as of July of 2020, the main focus areas are sidewalk and flat work, as well as weed abatement, chemical spraying. There's also some ditches that have been cleared and some curb miles swept. I also wanted to give an update, not in a printed report, that the short line project, which is our pavement markings, so those are the stop bars, arrows, those types of things, that project has been under construction, so you may see those look a little brighter out there, looking to be completed by October 16th. We had some weather days built in, so it may be finished a few days before. We also had a separate contract for our long line striping. These are the fog lines, the double yellows in the middle, those big long lines. That project is complete. We're just wrapping up some punch list items. So hopefully safer out there as we go into the winter weather. Thank you.
Any questions on the street operations report? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 8, board comments. Chaz, any board comments?
No, thank you.
Greg? No. Lori? Mark?
Just one, how about a drag strip on Colorado? Is it a quarter mile or not? That would, you want to get some press coverage for RTC? I'm just kidding. So here's the point.
Friday
And I'm
night
glad
drags.
Mr. Stuckey's here. I'm so excited. I drive down the 395 just so I can see the construction, and it's really coming together now. It's just so great to see that and not need a four-wheel drive to get in and out of Arby's or someplace sometimes. I assume the vendors along there they've worked really well to make sure they have access to those points, but it's just so much pleasure, and we'll drive along there and see what the final product's starting to look at, the roundabout and the separate bike lanes. Just a great project. What a great, great project. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I also wanted to address the South Carson project and just ask for a quick update on the construction schedule. Mr. Stuckey.
Dan Stuckey, Deputy Public Works Director for the record. Yeah, so the roundabout, as you mentioned, it's starting to take shape out there. If it hasn't already happened, I know they're going to start switching traffic, so you can head northbound and do that. They'll open up Stewart, so you can do that sweeping right to Stewart as well, and then they'll detour southbound traffic through Roop Street so there will be no southbound traffic through the roundabout. They'll build that other half. They're doing the mill and fill down on the south part of the project. That should be taking shape, I think, by the end of September. A lot of that concrete work that's happening on the east side, some of those parking pullouts, they're doing that right now. The roundabout should be done by mid-October, I believe, and open and fully functional. And then they're hoping to get some of that landscaping in. Obviously, the roundabout, you've seen it in the center part there, but starting to work on some of those landscaping in those landscape buffer areas adjacent to the multi-use path there. So it's taking shape. Nevada Day, everything's looking good for that. So yeah, we're excited to get that in. We did, just to update RTC, we did submit another grant application for the Gateway Monument in the center of the roundabout. Lucia actually did a great job leading that effort and submitting that application. I'm not sure if you've been updated on that, so we're waiting to hear on that. But that vision is still fully in works, and we're trying to leverage some of those local dollars and get some of that grant funding to do something pretty significant there. So I did want to update you that that's still in the works there.
So that would be the roundabout at the roundabout.
The roundabout at the roundabout.
Right, it's the arch from the roundabout, right? The old roundabout depot.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah. We made the decision not to have that in the roundabout. We're going to do something else. As far as those gateway arches is what you're talking about, yeah, those, there was a good discussion we had with the working group, and we've decided not to pursue that specific opportunity. We still want to do something significant with those. They're at the Public Works corporate yard right now.
Is that to keep pedestrians out of the roundabout?
Yeah, that was a talking point, is it's not safe for pedestrians to get into the center. We didn't want a piece that people are going to want to touch and read about and historical type features. So that's why one of the major reasons it was taken off the table.
What is the proposed project if she wrote a
I
grant?
propose that we have a big bronze 2020 with the circle and the slash through it, put right there.
Did you want to? Well, I'll let Lucia chime in, but as far as all ideas are up in the air right now, the working group we had a while ago, this has been a year now, really wanted something like a monument that's kind of, it has an impact from all sides. It's not one dimensional. It's hitting all entrances into the roundabout. So something that has a historical component. So it's still up in the air. I mean, the intent with the grant application that we put in is to put out an RFP, have artists proposed an idea for it, and part of that would be working with stakeholder groups and all that. So it's still up in the air what it will be. Do you want to elaborate anything on that?
Just to add, so the RFP would have a group of artists propose their idea. A group of finalists would be selected by a committee, and we proposed one member of RTC be on that committee. It's a joint partnership with the Visit Carson City, the Arts and Culture Commission, State Tourism, Travel Nevada. So we'll form a committee to select, and then 3 finalists will come to Carson City, meet us, give us their presentation, and then a finalist will be selected. And then there's about a 6-month period where they would actually construct their art, and then the installation would be open in advance of the 2022 Nevada Day, and there would be some sort of celebration.
So on that RFP, do we have the ability to have a local preference point system?
Absolutely. And that
There's-
RFP will be developed and led by Dave Peterson at Visit Carson City and us as a partner.
Because we have one of the best sculptors in the country that lives right here in Carson City.
We can develop that however we want.
Okay.
I hear there's a whale sculpture available.
A whale sculpture. Any additional questions or comments under board comments? Hearing and seeing none. We are on agenda item 9. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled immediately after the CAMPO meeting on Wednesday, October 14th, right here in the Sierra Room. Is that correct? Will we be in the Sierra Room, or will we be in the theater? We'll be in the theater. So we need to correct that. In October, we'll be in the Bob Boldrick Theater.
You have to wear makeup.
So we need to change that on all the agendas that are meeting in here for October. All right, so officially, we'll be meeting in the Bob Boldrick Theater on October 14th, immediately after the CAMPO meeting ends. And we are now on agenda item 10, our final public comment. Desi, anybody on the line for public comment?
There's no final public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. We are now on agenda
That was fast.
adjourned. Thank you all for participating.